So we're going to now see if we can come to understand better what that Unsharp Mask settings mean. For years I've used it, never really understood. And there's some very useful things in it. So if you'll go to File, Open, and you'll go to the tutorial images, and we're going to open, we've done Snickerdoodle. So we're going to do Butterfly and Tony Kuiper Sharpening Image. So those two we're going to open. Butterfly and Tony Kuiper Sharpening Image. Okay, the butterfly will be useful for this. So I've gotten an image was basically adjusted. In the process of adjusting it, I darkened the background and I lightened and gave a little contrast to the foreground. So that's how I made the butterfly pop. Now I'm at the point where I need to think about sharpening it. I've given you great tutorials, and some of them are not the ones I handed out. I encourage you to go through those PDF files. Some of them are simply a link to the whole discussion back on his blog, and I encourage you to look at it, and if it's over your head, just ignore it. But some of you are technical whizzes enough that you'll like some of the detail he gives you to understand. But one of the basic things he talks about is the difference between sharpening for the web or for projection or sharpening for printing. And he says you need to sharpen more when you print, because if it's an inkjet printer, it flows ink over a page and it will automatically tend to blur the image more than projecting it. So that if you're printing images, you need to think a little bit more about having greater sharpening on those files. What I want you to see is what happens if we go to use the Unsharp Mask. When you are sharpening, you are always working on pixels, and you can always make mistakes. So we're going to make a copy of the background. A neutral blank copy is no good for sharpening. So it's either Command and Control J or Layer, Duplicate Layer. And if I want to name what I'm doing, I can say Sharpening. So I'm going to do this. Incidentally, he also has a great description of which sharpening tools he recommends in Photoshop or in Elements. He says that in both programs, Unsharp Mask is fine, but he points out that the first 3 sharpening tools in full Photoshop are fully automatic, and he never uses them. So you can look. I believe Smart Sharpen is the one he uses, and he doesn't use the others. But that's the information you get from reading his blog. We're going to go to find Unsharp Mask. In Elements, it's under Enhance, way at the bottom. And in full Photoshop, it's under Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And up comes a dialog box with 3 controls. When I originally learned to use this, the very simple thing I was told was, set the threshold to 0, the radius to 1, and don't ever exceed 150, as just a very simple guideline. Well, you can learn more as you go, and the thing that has meant the most to me was to discover what threshold means. 0 threshold means sharpen all pixels. If I raise the threshold, it skips the ones that don't have edges, strong edges. So in this case, I don't want to sharpen the smooth leaf in the background. And so if I raise the threshold a little and I apply it, it doesn't apply it to the background smooth pixels. It looks only for edges. And the higher the threshold goes, the more pixels it removes from the sharpening. So I thought, well, I might see it. So if I bring it up kind of high, and I look at this picture, and it's applied here, if I then go and watch up here, in fact, how do you watch up there? I don't know that it lets you use, well, you've got to temporarily cancel this. Let's zoom in. I'm going to get the zoom tool. I want to zoom in so that I see, how do I move this within the window? I hold down the space bar and I get a hand. You ever wondered, once you've zoomed in, how do you change the area that you're looking at? You hold the space bar, which will turn all tools into a hand tool. No matter what tool you're using, if you press the space bar, you've got a hand. As long as the space bar is done, you can position it just where you want to see it. So we've zoomed in so that we see this area of the leaf and we see the butterfly. And I zoomed in on this tiny file to 200%. Maybe that's more than I want. How do you undo a zoom? You hold the Alt or Option key and do a click. I'm now at 100%, and I'm going to hold the space bar and shift a little. I can't do much. For our purposes, we can't zoom. You all understand it's because this file doesn't have a high resolution. If you have one of your own files that has high resolution, you could really zoom in and not lose the sharpness. What I want to see now, when we go back to the Unsharp Mask, you all know where it is now, Enhance or Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. If I put the threshold, I have a good, strong sharpening here. If I raise the threshold, I want you to see what happens to the area around the leaf. Bring it back and bring it up, and bring it back. Can you see in the area in here where you've got some sharpening going on, and by raising the threshold, I soften the leaf area? This threshold will permit you to skip smooth areas and not sharpen them. A little later, we're going to look at a sky. It's a perfect example of why to use the threshold. If you're sharpening an image and you don't want to sharpen the sky because you know there's a little bit of noise in it and it doesn't need sharpening, by raising the threshold, you eliminate smooth areas from being sharpened. Okay? And the radius says how widely it looks for edges. The higher the radius is, the stronger the edge choice is. And that's why they recommended like a 1.0. And I have found in my images that are really sharp to start with, I lower the radius and get really picky. I don't want to do much sharpening. I can lower the radius. And then finally, with all those set, this is where I control how much sharpening occurs. So you'll notice this window has a preview button, which means you will see the results in your image that you apply. So I'm going to lower the sharpening and look at my butterfly, and raise the sharpening and see the butterfly change. And in so doing that, I have looked at edges. Sharpening does this. It says, we're going to look at the bright and dark points of contrast in your image, and we're going to accentuate them by making the bright side lighter and the dark side darker. So whenever you have a strong contrast, like over here, sharpening will brighten the white part of that edge and darken the dark part. And unfortunately, this is where our over-sharpening and our halos come from. The brights are over-brightened. The bright edge is too bright. And we're going to see how you can control that with a luminosity mask. So let's go in and let's do a fairly strong thing. I have a threshold of 15, a radius of 1, and I'm going to actually bring this up to quite a bit, like 140 or something, just so you see the effect. And I'm going to accept that sharpening. And then what we've just talked about is this has a bit of a harsh appearance because the white edges of all the sharpening contrasts, the white edges have been lightened too much. And so how we do it is by getting a selection that features the darks, because the darks are the ones that we really want to see. The dark sharpening is the most effective. And he suggests starting with darks 1, which is brings the greatest effect. It includes all of the darks that are 50% gray or darker. And we play the selection. And with the selection active, we're going to put a mask on our sharpening layer. How do you put a mask on? You go to that rectangle that has a circle in the middle, which says Add Layer Mask. And when you have a selection and you add a layer mask, it reflects the selection. So if you choose the selection first and then add a layer mask, the layer mask has the selection. And what it has done is it said, mostly show us the effect of the sharpening over the dark edges and hide it from the light edges. So what did it do to that image? We want to hide this lovely mask. And to hide a mask, incidentally, I gave you a handout with all of those keyboard commands on it today. You're going to grab the Shift key and click the mask. And it hides the mask. Now you see the sharpening without the mask. Now put the mask back and see the difference. And now you're going to say, well, with the mask there, did I really sharpen anything? Hide the sharpening layer. I didn't do a lot on this image because this image was really sharp, but look down at these edges down here, near the bottom of the image along the edge. It helps to define this area. We're going to do it on another picture where it's more obvious, but the idea behind this is sharpening, we know, all it does is look for edges between light and dark, and it adds contrast to those edges. And the contrast on the dark part is very useful. But if you lighten the light side too much, you end up with that over-sharpened look. And the halos that we find in some of our HDR images are from that effect. And this same mask applied to an HDR image will hide the halos. So what I want to do next is change images. So just simply close this and don't save it. And the other image open is Tony Carpenter's Sharpen. And this is the image that matches the handout I gave you today. And so what he's doing is very much what we did on the other one, but perhaps shows up a little better. We are going to use Unsharp Mask, and so we need to duplicate the background. Command and Control J, or Layer, Duplicate Layer. And I'm going to call it Sharpening. And you know, if you did Command or Control J, you could always rename a layer by double-clicking on its name and just retyping a new name. So this is the layer to be sharpened. So let's go Unsharp Mask, Enhance and Elements, or Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask in Photoshop. And again, we're not going to worry about the threshold in this one, so just drop your threshold to 0. The threshold is most useful where you have large areas that are smooth, like sky would be the main place I would use it. And now we're going to have the radius at 1, and we're going to maybe go up like 150. And to see the sharpening effect, hide the preview and bring it back, hide the preview, bring it back. Or if you want to see it in the window here, you can go and hold down your mouse button for a before and after. So if you are having an image, this is a very small screenshot from his handout, but if you had a large resolution image and you were doing this, you would not have 100% out here. So this brings it in close, and you hold the button down, it gets rid of the sharpening, lift your button, it brings it back. And if we want to increase this greater, let's bring the radius up to 1.5. For our purposes, I want you to clearly see the results on an image. So I've got my threshold at 0, my radius at 1.5, and my amount somewhere approaching 150. So I'm going to say OK. OK. Now I want you to hide the layer that you sharpened and bring it back. I want you to see that you in fact sharpened it. I also want you to apply what you just learned. And notice what is most apparent are the bright spots. Look along where the edges here are bright and dark. The reason there, look along this bumpy rock here. Can you see it? The reason that looks sharp is because the white edge around it is brighter. Look up along the top here. Can you see the contrast from here to here? And so what he's saying is that you can afford to sharpen a lot if you hide the white edge of the sharpening. So you can get a much sharper looking image without over sharpening or halos if you apply a luminosity mask. So we're going to go down to the selections to darks, and his words say, if you have still a problem when you use darks 1, you could always go higher. But in this case, darks 1, play the selection and create a mask by clicking on that add a layer mask icon. Okay? And if you want to look at this mask, the way we look at a mask in place of the image is to use the Alt-Option key, click on the mask, and it replaces the image. This is what that mask did. It hid the brightest part of that top, and if there is a bright section in that image, here it's hidden it. And if it's a dark or shadow, it's bright here. That means it's going to let the sharpening show through. Remember, white reveals and black conceals. It concealed the work from this area in here, and it concealed it along here wherever there was a bright section, but it allows it to come through on the darks. To get your picture back, Alt-click the mask again. So that little handout I gave you today, if you haven't used these keyboards, will help you. So now we want to see the before and after. So hide the sharpening, bring it back. It's subtle, but can you see how effective it is in bringing some detail out on the upper section here? Now, what did the mask do? Well, you know, hiding the mask means the Shift key. Hold it down and click the mask. There is the sharpening without the mask. And here it is with the mask. Can you see how this extreme contrast down in this area is modified? So we're going to do one more that will point this out even better. So this is the one that comes with his handout. So when you read his handout that I gave you, use this image and work it along with him to see what he's talking about. And remember, when he gets over your head, just let it go. If he gives you more detail than you need, you just ignore it. If you are into that kind of technical detail, you'll love everything he does. But you know that you can pick up whatever helps you and not feel put down if he gets too technical, because everybody is different as to how much they want to get that technical stuff. To use it later, don't save it. So close this file and don't save it. And we're going to open one other one that I've provided. So File, Open, and it's called Late PM North Rim. This is in Zion National. No, it isn't. We'll see what it is when I open it. Yes, it's got to be the North Rim of Grand Canyon. Yes, it is. I looked over several images. You're right. This is the North Rim of Grand Canyon. So this image I have pre-processed. Obviously, I took my raw file, I went through the raw controls, and I got it to the point where I think it's ready to be sharpened. And I can see that I've got lots of contrast in that image. If you have an image with a lot of contrast, you know there's going to be some problems in sharpening it, because sharpening adds to the contrast that's already there. And especially where you have lines between bright and dark, up here where you have the contrast going. And here's an example where you can use the Unsharp Mask to control and keep the sharpening out of the sky. So we're going to do this two ways. We're going to do it first with Unsharp Mask and then with Nick. So we have to copy this background, duplicate layer. It can take the time to sharpen or something. And now we're going to go and find that Unsharp Mask again. And I'm most concerned about the sky. So I'm going to drag this window, and you automatically get a hand down till I can see some blue sky. Okay? And I'm going to look carefully. You can see better on your computer than you can here. That if I enhance this sharpening so I can see the sky, I'll see some noise in the sky. If I raise the threshold, the sky turns flat. And now, look carefully. In order to see this work, you might want to raise your radius and your amount so it's very clear you see noise in that sky. I don't have a lot, but there's noise. I want you to raise the threshold and look at that area and notice how raising the threshold smooths out the sky. Can you see that on your own computer? That any place where you have noise at all, and I don't have much here, but sharpening always does damage to even, especially to smooth areas. If they're not free of noise, you're sharpening noise always. And this has the benefit of isolating that. So I can raise the threshold and smooth out the sky, lower the threshold and bring it back. So I encourage you to go at home with an image that you captured at a higher ISO, put it into Unsharp Mask, and play with the threshold to prove to yourself that it's a very useful setting. And I ignored it. Somebody said leave it at 0. So I didn't know what it did. Well, it's worth knowing what it does. I'm going to bring it back to the image itself. Oh, glory, look at that hideous thing. So I now am going to bring the radius back to 1. Can you see what it does when you raise the radius? The amount of pixels that are chosen are huge, and it becomes very, very rough and over-sharpened. So I start at 1, and if my image looks over-sharpened at 1, I can lower it. We're going to leave it at 1, and we're looking up here, and the amount, again, I'm just going to keep it fairly high. How do I see what I've done? The nice thing about Unsharp Mask is if you hold your mouse button over this little inset, it gets rid of the sharpening, and you lift your finger, it comes back. It's a great way to inspect the sharpening at 100%, because that's where it really matters. You look at an image, this is at 34% over here. It's very hard to see the effect of the sharpening on the whole image, but you can see it in the window. One of the benefits of Unsharp Mask is that. So we've gone through and we said I've got quite a bit of sharpening on that, and I wanted quite a bit so you could see the benefit of adding a luminosity mask to it. So if anything, overdo it. And his idea is you can overdo and get effective sharpening. If you apply a luminosity mask, you will not over sharpen. But you can increase the sharpening, especially if you're going to be printing an image. And I will get the question from George about how a sharpening relates to their printing process. Okay, so say okay. And now to see what's going to happen when we add a mask, we want to zoom in. I did give you a somewhat larger file. So grab your zoom tool and zoom in on the left side till you can bring in where it looks too much. That's great. Zoom in to 100%. And then use your space bar to move your image. I want to see the white rock, and I want to see the rocks above it. Can you see that if we were looking at our images at 100%, you would say right away that is over sharpened? And my tendency, we forgot to put it on a separate layer.
You might have.
Oh, you all did it right. Oh, and I'm the one who did it wrong. So I have to very quickly correct it. So how do I do it? I go back to, I had a duplicate layer. How did I lose it? I did something that I did not expect to do. I don't know. There it is.
It's showing now.
It's showing now. Okay. So now that I have a separate layer, I can add a mask. So go to Actions panel. You already have Darks 1 chosen. Play the selection with the play button. And when you see all the crawling ants, come up to where you add a layer mask. Okay? And then to see what effect that had, you're going to want to hide, alternately hide and show the mask. So to do that, you need your Shift key. Okay, Shift, hide and release that mask. Look what you did. Can you see that without that mask, it's those extreme bright white edges that are causing the trouble? All the mask did was hide the sharpening from the bright white edges. And now you still sharpened it, but without the over sharpening. And how do you turn off the sharpening? Go to the front of that layer and notice how much you really added to that sharpening. And from what he has said is, when you print, it's better to use a mask and hide the white edges, but keep all of that great sharpening there. You need it to get a really sharp print. And even without George's answers, I won't hurt my images by keeping them really sharp. And if you have at home images where you have applied special effects and had some halos around the contrast edges, where whatever you did, maybe you used Color Effects Pro or whatever, and you ended up with halos, this technique will get rid of the halos by simply taking that top layer that the Color Effects Pro worked on, add a Darks mask, a selection for Darks 1 as a mask, and you will get rid of those harsh glows that you have on edges. So keep it in mind as you're working. So now I'm going to look up here at the edges here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the Shift key. I'm going to hide the mask, look at the effect, and with the mask in effect, it smooths it out but still gives you beautiful sharpness. Then we're going to hide the whole sharpening and bring it back. Remember, what we're trying to achieve is quality, not always quantity. And sometimes it takes special techniques to get the quality sharpening without the negative parts. We've all sat in the seats of the auditorium at the camera club and looked at images and kind of closed in the dark of the place we can do anything we want with our faces. And looked and said, over sharpened. Whether the judge said it or not, we looked at it and said, that image is over sharpened. I'm wondering if a lot of those images, with this one technique applied, would have ended up much more attractive. Okay? Now, we want to do Nick. So what do? We're going to delete the layer so we get back to our original. So layer, delete layer. We'll take out the whole layer, and you have to say OK to it. We're back with the original image, and I'm going to make it fit the screen. View, fit on screen, or Command or Control 0. And we're going to do his technique, and he loves this, he says, because he says he does the same thing with every single image. He doesn't have to say, oh, this one needs to be treated this way, and this one needs to be treated that. He finds it his simplest method, and he does it when he's primarily printing, but there's no reason it wouldn't be fine for projected. So what are you going to do? You don't have to make a copy because Nick makes a copy. So go to Filter, Nick Collection, Pre-Sharpener. I've never used it before because it says RAW. You don't use it in RAW. I don't know exactly why it's called that. He says just open the Pre-Sharpener. Yes, there's two settings, Pre-Sharpener and Sharpener. Use the raw Pre-Sharpener. And when you open it, you've got to be sure you're at the default settings. So look up here. Your adaptive sharpening is at 50%, right in the middle. Your sharpen edges is right in the middle. If you move this and you double click it, it goes back. So the way to get back to the default, if this is somewhere off here, if you double click it, pops back. So these are in the middle, and the image quality is at normal. Now, I haven't tried it, but if you have a high ISO image, I don't know what it would do, but you could try it. He doesn't discuss that. Normal. And then there's nothing done down here. You have not selected a control point, so you don't have to worry about this. No matter what these settings are, there's no effect because you haven't used them. All right? So this is what you have to be worried about. Once that's done, you don't do anything but click OK. That's my kind of thing. He does the default raw pre-sharpener. He then goes back to filter, nick collection, and this time he chooses the output sharpener. So sharpener 3, output sharpener, comes up. And he goes up here, and he has everything defaulted. It's set for display, and it's the center. Adaptive sharpening is 50%. If you had used it and you double-click, it pops back. And these are all in the center. He does not change a thing on this window. It looks awful, but we know why. Why does this look awful? Because the white edges are sharpened too much, and so you know what's coming. Click OK. So let's look at the results. Let's take this and bring it to 100%. Can you see it's 34? Do just what you did before. Bring it up. Yes, you can see it's you wouldn't think it was over sharpened unless you looked at it at 100%, folks. Warning. Don't accept a final sharpened image unless you look at it at 100%. So we're going to add the darks as a selection, and we're going to add a mask. Okay? And now you can go and turn on and off the mask with the Shift key. Shift click, before and after. Before and after. With it on, turned on, hide that layer. No, in fact, let's go back to the original image before he did anything. How do you get to the original? Go to the bottom background, use the Alt-Option key and click on that eyeball. And there's it's brighter in there, but it's blurry. And you see that when he gets it back, he has edges with greater detail. Okay? And you can play with this. Every image will be somewhat different in how it's affected because the edges are different. But you can go through. Never in this methodology have I ever wanted to lower the opacity. But if you had a very striking, maybe sunrise picture with heavy contrast in it, you might end up lowering the effect, but I haven't found the need. How do I move around in this image? I hold the space bar and I drag it around, bring it up near the sky, go back to the original. Well, let's do this. Turn off the mask. So we're going to hold the Shift key. And notice the effect. Okay. Turn off both sharpenings by Alt-click the bottom. Can you see how this is smoothed out and you don't have much definition? When I turn back on the sharpening, you can see what it did to that image. And look how the detail in the bushes came out. But you don't have a sense of over-sharpening or halo in that at all. Okay? So what he likes about this, and maybe you can see it, you don't sit there and drag the sliders in the Unsharp Mask thing to decide what's the best. He has found that this method on his images works. So I'd give it a try. If it works for you, it's a lot easier way to sharpen than to debate about how much of this slider, how much of that slider. And I don't know, if I had a serious sky problem, I might apply some sharpening with the, what's the bottom slider? I might get rid of the sharpening from the sky.
Special.
Yeah. I might use a little of that first, but most of our situations, we're not really worried about that. We're worried about bringing out the detail. So it's a simple method, an easy one to use, and I think it's worth trying. And I am now starting to use it for sharpening images. I wouldn't worry about the difference in methodology unless I yell back to you and say, help, my feeling is that an image which is appropriately sharpened at 100% is going to work, whether you're printing or whether you're projecting it. The problem comes when we don't check 100% and we think the image looks just great. And then all of a sudden it gets blown up on the screen and you see all the sharpening that you didn't see at home.